Aniseh Bassiri. I'm a senior research fellow at RUSI, where I also lead the Unpacking the MENA program. Today, I will be talking about EU-Iran relations, and I will be starting by saying that, first of all, I think there is a EU policy towards Iran. I know this might come as a surprise, and obviously there is generally an idea that there are conflicting policies emerging from the EU with divergences among EU member states, but also, generally speaking, national interests often prevailing over bilateral, over a more shared common approach, and bilateral ties basically dominating compared to a shared idea when it comes to EU policy on Iran. We obviously have seen also the E3, so France, Germany, and the UK taking the lead in shaping the EU policy on Iran since 2003. So for nearly 2 decades, we have seen these 3 countries taking the lead. So I think it is very easy to think that they are the ones who decide and implement the policy on Iran, regardless of what other European countries think or want. But I think, generally speaking, while there are frictions, there are divergences, even among the E3 themselves, different preferences on tactical approaches or priorities, I think there is really a shared idea and priority interest focus when it comes to the EU policy on Iran. And I think 2 are the main features when it comes to these shared priorities and interests. One is the choice of engagement when it comes to dealing with Iran. Engagement and dialogue has been deemed as the best way to achieve results, which mean basically from the European side promoting reform within the country and increasing the chances of change in Tehran's regional policies. This kind of preference has been dictating the European policies towards Iran since the 1990s, so it's nothing new, and has always distinguished the EU from the US when it comes to Iran. This means that for the past 3 decades, the EU has had positive engagement towards Iran and has built long-standing relations. But this in no way means that there have not been rocky times, rocky relations with Iran. And it does not mean that engagement also leads to condoning Iran's behavior when it comes to, say, human rights violations or disruptive activities in the region, which is sometimes one of the assumptions. Obviously, Europe has its own set of sanctions against Iran, but I think, generally speaking, the idea within Europe is that pressure or sanctions themselves are not likely to result in a change of behavior, and rather engagement, dialogue, incentives are more likely to achieve the intended goal. So I think this is, some might say, one of the defining features of the European policy and approach towards Iran. The second main feature, which again I think characterizes the approach of overall Europe towards Iran, is very much the focus on the nuclear issue. Obviously, we have seen different types of engagement across the years since the 1990s, critical dialogue, comprehensive dialogue, you name it. But I think since 2003, we really have seen the focus on the nuclear issue as a result of the eruption of the nuclear crisis, the concern about the potential nature of the Iranian nuclear activities, I think really what the EU has shifted on is on preventing the development of nuclear weapons within Iran, and as well as avoiding a potential eruption of a war in the region. And these have been pretty much the underlying priorities from the European side towards Iran since 2003. So the resolution of the nuclear issue is seen from a European point of view as crucial when it comes to addressing all other matters, all other issues, which are not less important, but in their mindset comes as a second priority, with the first one being addressing the nuclear issue. Which brings me to the fact that the EU has been really very much focusing on the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or also known as the Iran deal, precisely because of that, precisely because of this set of priorities. In the European mindset, the JCPOA has been considered a notable achievement for multilateral diplomacy, obviously also for European diplomacy in particular, but I think there is a tendency not to always understand this stress of the European side towards the JCPOA, and especially over the past 4 years towards defending the survival of the JCPOA. Some believe that this has been driven by a European desire to engage in trade with Iran, or to defend one of its few foreign policy achievements, and this is the only reason why the EU is so much focused on defending the survival of the JCPOA. But I think this does not really represent the reality. Trade obviously is one of the vital aspects of the JCPOA reciprocal mechanism, and this is why the EU has been very much focusing on that as a way to maintain Iran within the deal, albeit with limited success over the past year. But it's not really the main goal. The goal is addressing the concerns which have been defining and shaping the European strategy towards Iran since 2003. So avoiding that Iran gets hold of nuclear weapons, and avoiding the eruption of a nuclear war in the region. And on top of that, the JCPOA was also believed to be a tool to basically open up the possibility of promoting a broader stability across the whole region. So because of that, there has been so much investment on the deal and the survival of the deal over the past few years. I think this brings me to how complicated the past 4 years have been for the European policy towards Iran. Obviously, what we have seen since the Trump administration has been in power, and the US has withdrawn from the nuclear deal, has been a weakening of the nuclear deal, with obviously also the consequent decision from the Iranian side to reduce its compliance, and therefore again a raise into the threat posed from a European perspective when it comes to the nuclear activities and the nature of the nuclear program from the Iranian side. Instead of more stability across the region, which again was one of the intended goals from the European side, we also have seen increased instability, potential for escalation, potential for war, especially over the past couple of years. So again, this has been particularly concerning from the European side. And I would add on top of that the fact that there has been also a weakening of the Iranian trust, if you wish, towards the European side. Obviously, Iran recognized the fact that Europe has invested a lot of political capital on finding a solution, a peaceful solution, through dialogue, through engagement with Iran on the nuclear issue. And Iran has also recognized that the EU has tried to defend the JCPOA following the withdrawal of the US, and it has taken a number of steps, such as the creation of index, but also generally speaking, steps taken within the UN Security Council, which were intended to maintain the JCPOA in place. But I think what we have seen and what the Iranians have seen over the past 4 years is also the limitation that the European side is faced with. While I think the European side has been pushed from the US to draw closer to the so-called maximum pressure campaign, they have continued to express their commitment to the JCPOA, but they also face a significant number of challenges in really standing up to the US measures. And I think the fact that the US-EU economies are intertwined in nature has really rendered the European attempts to uphold their kind of policy much more difficult and much more complicated, and that has had impact on the trust that the Iranian side has towards the European capability for action. So relations have been maintained, and I think, again, from the Iranian side, there is a recognition that the European side is still committed towards engagement and dialogue when dealing with Iran. But I think this is where the complication is even further potentially undermining the survival of the nuclear deal, but also potentially undermining the potential for expansion of EU-Iran ties moving forward. While political commitment was recognized in itself as very significant from the Iranian side up until, I would say, a couple of years ago, now concrete measures are requested. There is a lot of mistrust. There is a lot of unsatisfaction with what steps have been taken from the European side. So I think, where does this leave us now with the Biden administration coming to power and renewed trust and hope for a peaceful resolution to the crisis on the nuclear issue, but more generally to the escalation in the region? While there is all this optimism, I think we are in a very complicated situation, precisely because of this mistrust that now characterizes Iran's view towards the US, Iran's view towards Europe, but also the recognition of the limitations in terms of steps and measures that the European side can really take. I think it's clearer than ever that the European side can function mainly as a mediator, as a party that facilitates in terms of dialogue and engagement, and a party that should strive to maintain its distinct approach towards Iran, characterized by dialogue, but also by maintaining the relationship even in the most challenging of times and on the most sensitive of issues. So I think this is very much recognized, but there is also very much a recognition that until Europe develops more capability for action, I'm talking political, military, and economic action, without necessarily aligning with the United States, then until that day, the EU policy on Iran will very much depend and be affected by whatever the US stance on Iran will be. And this is going to be a significant limitation in terms of room for maneuver, but also for expansion of ties and, generally speaking, the ability of the European side to achieve its intended goal when it comes to Iran.